The right hand of a pastry chef is everything. Clara Fontaine understood this in the same deep cellular way she understood that butter had to stay cold, and that egg whites wouldn't stiffen if there was a single drop of yolk contaminating the bowl. Her hands were the thing that separated her from the rest of the world. Not her size, not her face, not the modest apartment on Tremé she'd scraped together rent money for 6 years running. Her hands were her value, and standing at the prep counter of the Cruz estate's private kitchen at 6:47 in the morning, she was doing the one thing she had promised herself she would never do. She was letting them shake. The compression bandage she'd bought at a 24-hour CVS on Magazine Street was already damp with sweat at the edges, wrapped over 2 fingers that should have been in a hospital splint. She could feel the broken bones shift when she reached for the butter dish, a sensation like gravel sealed inside a velvet bag. 3 of her ribs were cracked on the left side. She knew this because breathing all the way in cost her a white-hot flare of pain that made her eyes water involuntarily. She had been rationing her breaths since 2 in the morning, taking shallow sips of air, and telling herself it was fine, she was fine, she just had to get through today. Clara was a large woman. She had been large since the 8th grade, and the world had spent the years since teaching her how to make herself smaller in every way that didn't involve actual mass. Speak quietly. Don't take up conversational space. Don't complain. Don't let anyone see you bleed, literally or otherwise. She was exceptionally good at this. It was, in fact, one of the reasons Señor Leandro Cruz had kept her on as his private pastry chef for 4 years, even as his sous chefs cycled through every 6 months like a revolving door. Clara showed up. Clara never called out sick. Clara produced a white chocolate opera cake that had once reduced a visiting financier from Palermo to 3 full minutes of silence before he'd said quietly, in Italian, that it tasted like his grandmother's kitchen. Clara was invisible and irreplaceable at the same time. It was the only kind of power she had ever been allowed to hold. She pressed her left hand flat against the counter to steady herself. Today's dinner service was 12 covers, private, for members of the inner circle. 3 dessert courses. She had prepped the sugarwork yesterday afternoon, before the parking structure, before Denny Spade's men had been standing in the shadow between a concrete pillar and her car, waiting. They hadn't wanted her purse. Her younger brother Benny owed Denny Spade's organization, the Bayou Kings, a mid-level crew with deep roots in the East Bank, $43,000 in gambling debt that had been metastasizing for 2 years, compounding from a bad streak into something life-threatening. Benny was 25 and catastrophically bad at reading a table. He was also the only person left in the world who had loved Clara without condition or caveat, without making her feel that her body was an apology she owed someone else. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 months, drawing the hard-line a therapist she couldn't quite afford had once suggested. But blood was blood. Denny Spade's men had known exactly where to find her. They'd told her the clock was running out on her brother's life, while they took turns slamming her hand against the hood of her Civic. That had been 12 hours ago. Now she had a chocolate tuile to finish and a dinner service to survive. She was reaching carefully for the silicone mold with her left hand when the kitchen door swung open. Leandro Cruz did not come to the kitchen before noon. He was a man of structured routine, coffee at 7 in the formal dining room, calls until 10, meetings through early afternoon. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, with black hair that had gone silver at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved with authority as a design intention. He ran the Gulf Coast operation of a network that Clara had learned very quickly not to ask questions about. She knew what he was. She had known by the 2nd week, when 2 of his men had carried someone into the side garden at midnight, and she had looked down at her prep list and focused very deliberately on whether she needed to reorder vanilla bean paste. He did not come to the kitchen before noon. The Valrhona order came in, Clara said, without turning around, keeping her right side angled toward the counter. I was going to use the guanache for the ganache, but I pulled a sample of the araguani if you wanted to. Turn around, Clara. She turned. She kept her right arm tucked against her side, her left hand resting on the counter with a casualness she had been rehearsing since she arrived at 5:30. Leandro Cruz was looking at her the way he looked at his ledgers, with the particular unhurried focus of a man who made his living by noticing discrepancies. He was not looking at her face. He was looking at the line of her right arm, at the unnatural way her elbow stayed pinned to her waist, at the compression bandage just visible below her rolled cuff. "When did that happen?" he said. "I tripped on the stairs coming out of the market. I've got an ice pack on it. It's just a—" "You have no ice pack." "I did. It melted." She turned back to the counter. Her heart was hammering hard enough that she was almost certain he could hear it. "The ganache needs another 40 minutes before I can glaze thee." "Stop." He crossed the kitchen in 8 steps. She counted everyone. "Marisol." He raised his voice toward the hallway, and the housekeeper materialized in the doorway within 2 seconds. "Leave us." Marisol vanished without a syllable. Clara stared at the chocolate ganache setting in its mold and told herself that if she lost this job, she would find another one. She had credentials. 4 years at a named patisserie on Magazine Street before this. She could find something. She would survive. She had always survived. "Show me the hand," Leandro said. "Mr. Cruz, the service is at 8, and I still need at least 2 more hours of—" "Clara." His voice dropped half a register. It was the voice she had heard him use with his men when he said something that was not a request and never had been. "Show me the hand now." She turned to face him. She unwound the compression bandage slowly with her left hand and held her right out in the kitchen light. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Her ring finger and middle finger had swollen to nearly double their normal size, the skin pulled tight and glossy, the color a deep arterial purple from the second knuckle all the way across the palm. The fingers sat at an angle that fingers should not sit at. The joints were visibly displaced. Leandro reached out and took her wrist with both hands. His grip, which she had always imagined would be brutal, because everything about him suggested it, was so careful it stunned her. He held her hand as though it were something he was afraid to break further. He tilted it slightly into the kitchen light, and she watched something move across his face that she had never seen there before. A muscle jumped along his jaw. His eyes went very still. "This is not a fall," he said. "Mr. Cruz." 2 fingers broken, blunt impact on both. Somebody did this on purpose. He raised his eyes to hers. "Who?" And the last of Clara's composure fractured somewhere behind her sternum. She had been holding herself together with the discipline of a woman who had been told her entire life that her feelings were too large for the room. She had held it through the CVS parking lot at 2 in the morning, and through the drive home, and through the 4 hours she'd spent lying on her bathroom tile, and through the 2 hours after that, when she had actually come in early and prepped her mise en place, like everything was perfectly fine. She had held it together because she was very, very good at holding it together. It was her best skill. It was possibly her only consistent one. She could not hold it anymore. "My brother," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle of the word. "He owes money to Denny Spade. The Bayou Kings, they run numbers out of the East Bank there." She stopped. He already knew who they were. Everybody who operated in this city knew. They were waiting in my parking structure last night, 8 of them. They said Benny has until Friday. She pressed her left hand over her mouth. The tears came anyway, hot and humiliating. "I can't lose this job. I cannot lose this job. Please don't let me go. I can work with my left hand. I've done it before. I can pipe left-handed. I'll do double prep shifts. "You are not losing your job," Leandro said. He said it with total, quiet certainty, and something inside her simply stopped, like a gear that had been grinding suddenly finding its notch. "Sit down," he said. He moved the prep stool from the corner with one hand and placed it beside her. She sat. He pulled out his phone, typed something brief, and set it face down on the counter. 8 men. I think 8. 1 stayed back near my car and the rest. Who leads them? Denny Spade. He nodded once. He moved to the wall phone and pressed a single extension. Hector, kitchen, now. He hung up and came back to where she sat. He leaned against the opposite counter with his arms folded, watching her with that ledger-reading attention that had always unsettled her because it had never, in 4 years, been directed at her face. Tonight's dinner is cancelled, he said. You have 12 guests. They will reschedule. He said it the way a man says things when he has never once genuinely considered that the world might decline to rearrange itself around him. Dr. Fuentes is coming to the estate this morning. She'll set those fingers correctly and assess the ribs. Clara looked up. How did you know about the ribs? You've been breathing from the top third of your lungs since you walked in. You're guarding the left side. He said it without drama, the way a man says a thing he has learned from long proximity to violence and its aftermath. How many? 3. I think 3 cracked. I didn't get an X-ray. She looked at her hand, at the grotesque swelling that had made her nearly unrecognizable to herself in the bathroom mirror. I couldn't go to a hospital. I can't file a report. If Denny Spade thinks I've talked to anyone, they'll move up the deadline for Benny and I can't. There will be no report, Leandro said, and there will be no Denny Spade. Hector Rayner came through the kitchen door, compact, dark-eyed, the sleeves of his collared shirt pushed to the elbows. He looked at Clara's hand. Then he looked at Leandro. He didn't say anything. The Bayou Kings, Leandro said. 8 men. Denny Spade running point. They put their hands on someone in my household last night. Something happened to the air in the room. Find all 8. The usual facility. I want it done before sunrise. Hector glanced at Clara one more time. Not with pity, not with the dismissal she was accustomed to, but with something that looked like a calibration, and then he left without a word. Leandro moved the dish towel from the rack and very carefully wrapped it around her injured hand, cradling the weight of it. It was such a small thing, such a specific, attentive, domestic thing to do, the kind of thing a person only did if they were truly paying attention. 2 more tears went down Clara's face before she could stop them. Don't apologize for that, Leandro said. She hadn't spoken. You were about to, he said. You've been apologizing for existing in rooms for so long it's become the first reflex. He looked at her directly, and she made herself hold his gaze because she suspected that looking away would cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. You run the finest private kitchen in this city. You arrive before my staff, and you leave after them. You have never once in 4 years asked me for a single thing. Something moved behind his eyes. 8 men decided they could touch a woman who works under my roof. They made the last mistake they'll ever make. That is not a complicated calculation. He straightened and moved toward the door. Then he stopped. Benny's debt, he said, 43,000. Yes. It's been cleared. I had someone contact the bookie an hour ago. He said it the way he said all things, as established fact. I'll have men find your brother tonight. He'll be on a bus out of New Orleans by morning with enough to start over somewhere with a lower tolerance for his habits. He needs to understand that this city is finished for him. He'll understand, Clara said quietly. He's not a bad person. He's just never once in his life been careful about anything. Leandro looked at her. Most people who need saving aren't bad. They're just not careful. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Rest. Dr. Fuentes will be here in 40 minutes. Marisol will put you in the East Suite, ground floor, no stairs. He left. Clara sat on the prep stool in her kitchen with a dish towel wrapped around her broken hand, and the sound of her own breathing, still shallow, still rationed, filling the silence. She did not sleep well in the East Guest Suite, even with the pain medication smoothing the edges. The bed was wider than any she'd slept in. The sheets were a thread count she had no reference point for, and somewhere in the city 8 men were experiencing the consequences of underestimating who she worked for. She lay awake and thought about Benny on a bus. She thought about Dr. Fuentes's careful hands re-splinting her fingers and saying, gently, that it was a clean break and would heal completely if she stayed off it. She thought about Leandro appearing in the doorway at 10 o'clock that night with a bowl of chicken caldo and crackers because, he'd said simply, the doctor had mentioned she hadn't eaten. She turned on the bedside television at 6:15 in the morning. The local news had already picked up the story. 8 known associates of a low-level organized crime group had vanished overnight. No bodies recovered. No witnesses. The anchor called it unprecedented. A reporter stood in front of a shuttered bar on the East Bank, looking bewildered. The remote slipped out of her left hand. The door opened. Leandro came in carrying 2 plain ceramic mugs of coffee and sat down in the chair beside the bed without announcement or ceremony. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes were the same as they always were, clear and direct, and carrying some interior weather that she was only now beginning to learn how to read. He clicked off the television, set a mug on the nightstand. "It's done," he said. "All 8. All 8. Clara looked at the ceiling. A strange and specific calm had settled over her, the kind that came in the aftermath of a long and exhausting storm. "I keep telling myself this was about territory," she said, not quite meaning to say it aloud, that it was about your reputation, about the line they crossed by operating in your city, that it wasn't about. "Clara," he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, "I have let men slide for crossing territorial lines. I have done it dozens of times because patience was the better math." His voice was quiet and entirely without performance. "Last night I moved every resource I have in this city in the space of 3 hours. He held her gaze. "Do the math yourself." She did. The silence between them settled into something that was not uncomfortable. "I'm going to need at least 2 weeks before I can work the pastry station again," she said. The fingers, Dr. Fuentes was very clear. "You're not going back to the pastry station in 2 weeks," Leandro said. She sat up fast enough that her ribs punished her for it. "If you're letting me go." "You're not being let go." He met her eyes and held them. "Being moved kitchen director. You'll oversee the full operation. Ordering, menu design, staff, management. You'll have an assistant who handles the physical work. An office off the east corridor." He paused. "You will not lift a tray or pipe a single rosette while those bones are healing. Not because I doubt your capability, because you have been carrying things alone for so long that you've forgotten the option exists to set something down." Clara looked at him. The morning light was moving across the east wall, and it was quiet in the way that expensive houses are quiet, which is a different kind of quiet than anywhere she had ever lived. "You decided all of that," she said, "while I was asleep." "I decided most of it 4 months ago," Leandro said. "I was waiting for a reasonable occasion to raise it without you arguing yourself out of it in the first 30 seconds. Something unexpected happened to her face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one, and she felt it arrive with the faint surprise of a thing she hadn't expected to feel for some time. "I would have argued," she admitted. "You were already arguing just now, and I hadn't finished the sentence." He stood, picked up his mug. "Staff meeting at 9. I'd like you to run it." He was at the door when she said, "Leandro." He stopped. She had never used his given name before. It had always been Mr. Cruz, with the careful distance of someone who understood the hierarchy and stayed well within it. She felt the weight of the word in the room, the way it rearranged the air between them. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, but also specifically for the caldo last night." That was, she stopped. Found the right words. That was the part I didn't know how to account for. He stood in the doorway for a moment, with the early light behind him. "You've been accounting for everything alone for a very long time," he said. "You can stop." The door closed. Clara Fontaine sat in the wide white bed in the East guest suite of the Cruz estate, her broken fingers properly splintered, her coffee going warm on the nightstand, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she occupied exactly as much space as she was supposed to. Outside, New Orleans was waking up. The French market was opening its stalls. Somewhere on a highway heading north and west, her brother Benny was asleep against a bus window with a duffel bag and a second chance he had done absolutely nothing to earn. 8 men who had laughed in a parking structure were not waking up at all. And in the kitchen that had been her entire world for 4 years, Marisol was moving Clara's soufflé molds into cold storage with the careful, deliberate hands of a woman who had been told exactly how they needed to be handled. Clara drank her coffee. She breathed in all the way, slowly, still carefully, but all the way, and let the pain be what it was. She had a staff meeting at 9. She intended to run it well.